So I've been noticing in a lot of places that I frequent after the midterms that there's a lot of discussion from people saying, oh, if you voted Republican or Democrat, you wasted your vote. They're all part of the establishment. So you're just participating in a charade if you even voted at all. Now, I think that this video will be difficult because a lot of the people that follow me probably believe this. And in fact, I believe that like 90% of the way, right? If you've seen my videos, you know that I'm always complaining about how at the establishment level, I feel like the Republicans and Democrats are the same. What I mean by this is when it comes to issues that mean those groups maintaining power or getting wealth, or the people that financially back them getting power or wealth, they seem to always agree. So when it's bailing out the banks, for example, they agree on that. When it's having these regime change wars, they always seem to agree with that. The Federal Reserve existing in their policies, they agree with that. Things like immigration, like the Republicans give lip service and say, oh, we're going to curb illegal immigration, but then they don't do anything because they want the cheap labor. Both sides tend to agree. They want these illegal immigrants and people, cheap labor coming across. And other things like repealing Obamacare, the Republicans ran on that. Then when they get power, they don't do anything about it. So I think at the top level, that's definitely true. And so you might be asking, well, then what's this video going to be about? Well, there are some areas that I disagree that I think are worth talking about. Now, if you're one of the people that you think I'm referencing you when I'm talking about this, maybe you're right, but don't take offense to it. Like, just because I disagree with you on this, again, I'm saying I agree with you on 90% of the stuff. And even if I 100% disagree with you, that's great. Disagreement's good, right? You should be flattered that, at least me, I'm taking your opinions credibly enough to want to respond to them. So anyways, here we go. The first thing that I'm against with this is I think that some people come off as too arrogant when they're making this argument. It's like they're implying that somehow they're better than the people that vote. Oh, you still think voting matters? I don't vote. You're participating in a charade. You need to be smart like me. And it's like, oh, okay, well then what's your solution? Just don't vote? That's your solution? You really think that's going to change anything? Guess what? The very establishment people that you say that you're against that make it so worthless to vote, they're hoping that people take that. Yeah, they would love like 20% turnout, right? Great. Now all we need is the actual partisans voting, and that'll be the end of that, right? 20% of the people that actually vote will control the entire political system, and the other 80%, who cares? They're just not voting. So I don't understand. Like, that's fine if you have criticisms, but you need to have a solution. This is something that when I was in debate, you would hear this all the time, right? Where people would like push this postmodernist ideology and be like, oh, there is no such thing as truth. Everything's just power games. So we shouldn't even have a U.S. Congress. We shouldn't even have any legislative bodies because it's all just power struggles. It's like, oh, okay, well then what do you suggest? What's the alternative? Well, we just need to rethink. Like, what is that? That's not a viable solution. Like, okay, you're criticizing capitalism. So are you endorsing socialism? Are you endorsing communism? What financial system? Oh, no. I'm not endorsing a system. I'm just saying your system sucks. Okay, great. But it's still, to me, preferable to try to work within that system to make positive changes, albeit if they're small, rather than just saying we need to reject the system holistically. So I think that there is a danger of becoming arrogant. Now I'm sure there's probably people listening like, yeah, whatever, man, you're arrogant as well. Yeah, I probably am sometimes. So again, I'm not claiming to be somehow beyond reproach and discussing being condescending at times. I know that I do that at times. I try not to, but yeah, I'm human. We all do it. So, if you're one of those people, just remember there might be people that, like me, for example, that, yeah, I agree with you that the established, that voting for these parties, it would be better to have more choices, and then at the highest level, these establishment parties are kind of the same, but I'm still trying to make nuanced choices within that. That gets into the second thing I wanted to talk about. I think that this is too simplistic of a view, because what ends up happening is people just say, if there's an R for Republican or D for Democrat next to someone's name, then they're automatically part of the establishment, and they need to be rejected out of hand. But that doesn't take into account a lot of nuance. For example, at local levels, do I think the person running for my town government, just because they have a Republican or Democrat title next to their name, that they're part of the establishment? No, of course not, right? Now, as you get higher into the national levels, maybe that becomes more and more true. I agree with that. But I still think that there are people within the party that have Republican or Democrat that aren't necessarily establishment. Good examples I give would be someone like Ron Paul, right? I think it's clear that the establishment severely dislike Paul because he was against some of their main criteria, such as the regime-changing wars. He was against that, very vocal. He was against things like the Federal Reserve and bailing out the bank. They didn't like him, so their strategy with him was they just kind of tried to censor him and not leave his opinions get out there, right? That was their strategy with him. There are people on the Democratic side currently, like Tulsi Gabbard, who I really like. I don't agree with everything she says, but she seems to be someone who's trying to talk sense and doesn't want these regime change wars, doesn't want like a conflict with Russia and things like that. Do I think then that she's part of the establishment? It wouldn't be worth voting for her over like some, neocon like Jeb Bush. Of course not. I still think it would be preferable to vote for Tulsi Gabbard, and it would be a worthwhile vote. I don't think it would just be another vote for the establishment. I feel the same way. I felt the same way in the election about Trump and Bernie. Now, you might say, oh, no, Trump is the establishment. Look, I disagree in the sense that I think there are some things that are doing that are a disappointment to me and that seem to favor the establishment. But it seems clear to me that the establishment at least was worried about him, right? They're using the intel agencies to go after him, lock, stock, and barrel. Where the 90% of the mainstream media is after him. Almost all of our cultural institutions are constantly after him. We have almost all of academia is constantly after him. It's clear that these establishment groups don't like what he represents. Whether or not he will fulfill that representation remains to be seen. But to mock people that tried to vote for someone that was seemingly against the establishment or just out of hand say, oh, it says Republican, therefore he's establishment, so it wasn't worth voting for him, just seems ridiculous to me. And I get this idea of like, well, voting for the lesser of two evils isn't like, I've made that argument myself. It isn't the way to do things. But what was the alternative? Gary Johnson and what was his guy? Bill Weld, who used to be like they used to be Republican congressmen themselves. Jill Stein. Like there weren't seemingly like a third party that I would have voted for, but I was young, or an independent, I guess, would have been like Ross Perot. That was someone that economically at least seemed to want to buck the establishment trends. That seemed reasonable, but I don't see how I'll vote for Gary Johnson or Jill Stein would have did that. And like looking at my elections that I personally was able to vote for yesterday, there weren't a lot of options for third parties, right? Almost every race was just Republican versus Democrat. So what am I supposed to do? Not vote? Like I still in that world try to make the decision that I think will be best. I think that the Democrats kind of fighting against due process was a deal breaker for me. That was the number one reason I voted. But nonetheless, maybe you voted for Democrat and you don't like the establishment as well, and you have your reasons for doing that. That's great. But I just think that it's oversimplistic. It seems to be simplistic in the same sense that like feminism is, like where it's just like, oh, everything's the patriarchy, or intersectionality, where like, everything's racism, right? That's it. Like you can say anything, and it's so simplistic. It's like, well, racism, well, sexism. That's it, right? To me, it's the same kind of intellectual laziness and simplicity to just be like, oh, it's all establishment. You voted for someone, it's just establishment, right? And you could say, what you'll hear is people will say things like, well, it's all a ruse that the establishment doesn't like Trump. In reality, they're just pretending because that's all part of the game, right? But then what's this? Well, then my counter to that is like, well, then who are you voting for? Let's just say, then you say third party, like Jill Stein. Oh, no, that's just a ruse as well, that she's anti-establishment. Now where are we? Right? Like if I can't use examples of the establishment going so far as to get FISA warrants to spy on Trump's campaign, having all this negative attitude towards Trump like 90% of the time, even people in his own party becoming never Trumpers such as Flake and McCain and others that are against his agenda, and all these Republican media people that became never Trumpers. Like, if I can't cite that as examples of why this guy might not be establishment, then what can you ever say? Is it really just the letter next to their name? So if he would have ran as a libertarian one, then it's like, oh, now he's not establishment, even if he had all the exact same policies. It just seems ridiculous and oversimplified to me. That's all I'm saying. So yeah, at the end of the day, the question is, well, then how do we break up this establishment kind of control over things? I don't know. Like, I'm open for suggestions. If you're one of the people that are legitimately telling me that I wasted my vote by voting for anyone who's Republican or Democrat, that's what I'm asking then. It's like, well, then what's your suggestion? And I don't really get much. It's just like, oh, we need to reform the system. Yes, got it. How do we do that? Well, we need to get different voices in there, different people. Okay, agreed. How do we do that? Right? Like, those voices weren't there yesterday. So what was I supposed to do? Not vote? Again, that seems worthless. That doesn't seem like it's going to help. I think the best thing we can do is to have discussions like hopefully my channel tries to do, to kind of point out what's wrong with the establishment, to try to vote for people that at least we perceive as being against the establishment, even if we're wrong, right? Like, my looking at it now is like, I thought Bernie Sanders was not very establishment, but then after he totally rolled over after the Democrats screwed him over, it makes you scratch your head like, well, maybe he is. And maybe you're thinking, well, it turns out Trump's establishment too. He bombed Syria. Yeah, I'm against that. He's exploded the debt. That's an establishment thing to do. Yeah, I'm against that too. Right? There's a lot of things he did that I'm not happy with, but anyways, you see what I'm saying? At least there's a perceived effort to vote against the establishment. And then the third thing to do is, like, get involved in local offices yourself, right? Try to do what you can. And I think that and that's something that I plan on doing in the future, but I think with the advent of social media, even though there's still gatekeepers and they're still trying to censor anti-establishment ideas, I think that more and more people are going to start to get information that kind of illuminates just what these establishment parties are and will allow alternative voices to come in. Whereas, a decade or two ago, the gatekeepers were basically the mainstream media, and if you didn't break into them, then you weren't going to break in. I think like a Ron Paul would have a far better chance running today than he did even in 2008, because back then the media still had more pull where he was beholden to them giving him coverage, which they didn't give, and so his message wasn't able to get out there. And fortunately, he's a little old now, so I don't see him running, but I do like his son Rand, so maybe he'll run for a higher office someday. So. But yeah, that's just what I see. So, at the end of the day, I agree with a lot of the people that say that both parties are kind of established, but I do think that it's worthwhile kind of nuancing and trying to pick through to see which one represents you better in the races that only they're available. And I think that the best thing we shouldn't just throw the baby out with the bathwater and say merely by being Republican or Democrat it's worthless to vote for any of them. And I also think that we need to be able to continue to try to get alternative voices, and that maybe those voices will be in the Republican or Democratic Party. That's great. We need to get different voices up there to have more of a representation of the people instead of this kind of establishment oligarchy on both sides that seem to be very distant from the people and more interested in maintaining power than representing the will of the people. So, all right, thanks a lot. If you like the video, like and subscribe. Check out some of my other videos. Please recommend me to other people if you like it, and have a good one.